are still quite a few that I did it because I didn't want someone to be able to call up the magazine and say, you have no idea of what you're talking about. You've never even been to my town. And people did occasionally do that. I wanted to be able to say, yes, I have. Most of the towns I needed to visit still were in eastern Connecticut, because I was born and brought up in western Connecticut. And so I set out to do it. I had this vision of going to these small towns in the eastern part of the state and sitting around the Cracker Barrel and the general store. Not true. It was more like Cumberland Farms. But still, I did get out of the car and I did talk to people. And one of the things that I did eventually visit all the towns, but one of the things that I came away with, and I think it's still true now, is that people in Connecticut, who live in Connecticut, often do not have a very strong sense of identity with the state. I think unlike a Texan or a Vermonter or a New Yorker, people in Connecticut have never had that sense of identity. And there are a few reasons for it. One thing is that we don't have a large city that helps that acts as a magnet for people. We have kind of fiefdoms. We have Hartford, and we have Fairfield County, and we have the Shoreline, and we have Litchfield County, and we have southeastern Connecticut. So that doesn't help. We tend to identify more with the towns that we grew up in or that we live in than we do with the state as a whole. And also geographically, we are, as we know only too well, located in between, to the north, the hub of the universe, and to the south, the city that never sleeps. Those are two very obnoxious neighbors. And we, as a result, we don't know, depending on what part of the state you're in, we don't know whether we should be part of New England or whether we should be part of metropolitan New York. Lots of Connecticut feels like New England, although the rest of New England doesn't seem to be eager to include us in the ranks of true New England states. And in parts of Connecticut, they think that Cuomo is their governor, basically. So we've always, it boils down to the Red Sox and the Yankees. I mean, that sums it up pretty well. We just are not sure where we belong. So part of that is natural. It's due to geography, but to tell the truth, we haven't done a very good job on our own of forging an identity for ourselves. And this we can see in many, many places. For one thing, our state song, among all the state songs, is the only one that doesn't mention the name of the state in it. I'm sure this is a knowledgeable group here, I'm sure. You know what the state song is, right? Right?
Right.
Okay. I don't even know what Yankee Doodle is about, but it certainly doesn't mention Connecticut. Now, Connecticut, granted, is a hard word to rhyme. It's a hard word to put into a song and make it work. We all remember Better Yacht Connecticut as a tourism slogan. It's hard to rhyme, but still, I think we could have done better than this. And there's more. Oh, this is much too big for the screen. Anyway, yeah, can this fit in better? This is only capturing like part of the image. Anyway, our state university mascot has nothing to do with Connecticut. It has to do with Yukon, spelled with a Y. That territory up there in Canada, unlike the Cornhusker of Nebraska or the Longhorn of Texas or even the Minuteman of Massachusetts, we chose for our state university mascot a pun, which is the lowest form of humor, and we've had to stick with it ever since. Well, we can just maybe. Just leave it the way it is. We'll see how this turns out. Okay. Now we're all familiar with There we go. There we go. There's the Yukon Husky. And we're familiar with the nice husky that was the symbol for many years. And now we have the mean husky. And it's hard not to notice that the meaner the husky gets, the worse the football team plays. So I think they were hoping for the opposite, but that hasn't been the case. We're known as the Constitution State. It's on every license plate. Yet, no one ever really teaches or tells us or lets us know why we're the Constitution State. And I think people vaguely think it has something to do with the U.S. Constitution, when really it has to do with the fundamental orders in the 1630s, which was drawn up, a document drawn up, a governance for governance drawn up here in Hartford, which laid a foundation for what would become state constitutions, our own state constitution, and remotely, but still true, the U.S. Constitution. It was sort of a beginning document for life in the United States. That's why it's on our license plates. We don't even know what to call ourselves. Connecticuters, Connecticutites, Connecticutians. For some reason, we have settled on, unfortunately, on nutmeggers. And if you go back and look into the history of this, you will see that nutmeggers was a term cast at Connecticut people disparagingly. We had peddlers, Yankee peddlers, who went out from Connecticut to the hinterlands, and they had their wagons with pots and pans and clocks. And among the things they brought were things like nutmegs. And I say things like nutmegs because supposedly they brought things that actually weren't nutmegs, that looked like them, that had been carved out of wood, and that they foisted on the people out in the hinterlands. Was his first big one. So he often has sun in it, but not really a good tattoo for Connecticut pride. Food. Food is a way, naming foods is a way to build up pride. You think of buffalo wings, think of Boston baked beans, think of Philadelphia cream cheese. I mean, why it's Philadelphia cream cheese, I don't know, but, and we have come up with foods. We have concocted dishes, but we've never really, again, put our name on it. The hot lobster roll was introduced in Milford, but it's not called. I believe that it should be called the Connecticut lobster roll. I think it should be everywhere referred to, the hot lobster roll. It's an uphill battle. You want a blank stare, go in and ask someone for the Connecticut lobster roll. Arguably, and because we live in Connecticut, we must say that the hamburger was invented in Connecticut. And the place where it was invented is still standing and still serving hamburgers. Lewis Lunch in New Haven, still made the same way it was made. But for some reason, they decided to name it after a city in Germany. Whereas, I mean, can you imagine this past week if at that luncheon at the White House for the Clemson football team, they were talking about New Haveners that they were served? The sense of pride that we would have felt if that had been the case. Or if you went by McDonald's and it said 6 billion New Haveners sold. But not the case. So essentially, here we are in between Rhode Island clam chowder and Manhattan clam chowder without a chowder to call our own. So I went back to the magazine and I thought, this is interesting. This is something that we should do something about in the magazine. And I had the choice of doing either a long take, 5,000 word thumbsucker on Connecticut, poor Connecticut, here we are in between Boston and New York. Or the way I much preferred to do it was to do each month on the back page of the magazine to do something called Connecticut Icons. And each month I would take a thing or a place or a physical attribute of the state, a product invented here, and do a short essay on it. And I did that for 5 years. So we had 60 of them. About halfway through, I realized this was a book. This could be a book. It's kind of almost ready-made. So I went to Globe Pequot Press in Guilford and presented the idea to them, and they accepted it and waited till I finished. We ended up with a book of 50 of them, and it sold really well. It was this was in 2006, and it went through first printing, and then a second printing, and then a third printing, and it sold probably 10,000 copies. And this is why I advise people not to get involved in anything to do with publishing. They refused to do a fourth printing for no known reason, or at least no reason that they would give me. They completely sold out the third printing. They had a standing order from the state of Connecticut for 300 copies that economic development is going to put into packages to send out to people who are interested in coming to Connecticut for their business. They just wouldn't do it. So it took me a while to get over that. But then a couple of years ago, they had a new regime there, and I got a phone call and they said they would like to do a new edition of Connecticut Icons. So it was great. I thought that was great. It allowed me to update everything. I added some new icons. We put a new cover on the book, and I have got somewhere here. I did bring more than one copy, just so you know, just in case you thought it would be something to buy. But anyway, it's a nice little hardcover book. And each icon gets its own spread, and there are 56 or 57 icons in there. So, to give you an idea of what is inside there, I've devised a quiz, a Connecticut Icons quiz, and I encourage all of you to chime in when you know the answer. Even if you are wrong, that's perfectly fine. Here's the first question. Cut-in-Two Island was once home to a beautiful midget with whom Tom Thumb reputedly fell in love. Where is Cut-in-Two Island located? Yes. Off Branford. Yes. Thimble Islands. Have any of you gone on the tours? It's really pretty terrific. There are, I think, 3 competing captains, the captain hat, who take you through the islands, and they just make up stories, supposedly the history of the Thimble Islands. None of it rings true. And of course, Captain Kidd has buried treasures in maybe all of these islands. He was the worst pirate ever, by the way. I mean, what pirate doesn't spend the money that he loots? And instead, he went around hiding it. The villages of Jerusalem and Leech Hollow were flooded in 1928 and remain underwater to this day. Where are they located? Candlewood Lake, the largest body of water, and it's a man-made lake. It came into being in the 1920s when the state decided it wanted to boost economic development in the western part of the state. They needed a source of energy. So they bought land in the valley here, and crews came down from Canada and chopped down thousands of trees and burned them on site. There was a haze over western Connecticut for a couple of years. They put 4 dams in, and then they brought water over the hill from the Housatonic River. And gradually the valley filled up with water until they got to the height that they wanted. But if you put on your scuba gear, you can go down and you can see the crossroads and some buildings and some farm implements and the remainders of these villages that were once there. Well, they're still there. The Conavar, the blend of fruits, nuts, coconut, and chocolate, was the forerunner to what Connecticut-born tree? Absolutely. 1920s, almost every candy bar that you know of now, that you enjoy now, was invented in the 1920s. And there are 2 brothers, Peter and Paul, who were from New Haven, and they worked on things until they finally came up with the Mounds Bar. They moved from New Haven north to Naugatuck, and they built a plant there. And for decades, every single Mounds Bar and Almond Joy in the world was made in Naugatuck, Connecticut. And then they were bought by Hershey. And Hershey couldn't wait to close the plant down and move them out of the state and down to Virginia. And that's what they did. And I boycotted Mounds briefly in protest. Where can you take a free tour of barns and fields containing 200 dairy cows, 40 swine, 55 beef cattle, 85 horses, and over 1,000 chickens, ducks, and geese? It's a great trip. Great outing to the Yukon Animal Barns. Yukon started its life as an agricultural school. It still has an agricultural program. And it's sort of a nice, the Horse Barn Hill here in Storrs is a nice echo of those years. It's surrounded by what's now a multi-billion-dollar research industry and university. But it's a really nice day trip to go up there. You self-guide yourself through the barns and see the animals, and then you cap off the day with Yukon Dairy. Best ice cream in the state, I think. One of the few places where you can personally thank the cows while you eat the ice cream that they help produce. Plus the servers are all Yukon students, and they just don't care. They just load the ice cream on. The angry, very large Native American spirit called Hobomok, who once stomped his feet and caused the abrupt turn in the Connecticut River, is today known as Sleeping Giant. As you can imagine, everyone from Native American days to today sees this formation and says, it looks like a sleeping giant. They had a tale that they concocted where this spirit Hobomok was sort of unruly, and was causing problems, and they claimed he caused the Connecticut River comes down from northern New England, and then in Middletown it goes off southerly to the southeast, and they blamed that on Hobomok. So as his punishment, they put him to sleep, and there he is. They didn't say for how long he would be asleep, so it's something to, if you have a young child seeing it for the first time, you can say that's where the sleeping giant is, and no one knows when he's going to come back to life again. That adds a little. They were shaped like hot dog rolls, but were chewier and more substantial. What were these rolls designed to hold? Yes. I'm kind of obsessive about lobster rolls. But the first one was Milford. A fellow named Harry Perry had a seafood shack down by the water. It was successful, so he moved uptown to the Post Road and opened up a restaurant. And this was not in his menu. Lobster rolls at that time were, as they sometimes still are, were the cold lobster salad with chopped celery and mayonnaise. But he had a salesman who used to come through 3 or 4 times a year, who used to ask him, just heat up some lobster meat, put it on a toaster roll, and put some melted butter on it. And eventually it occurred to Harry Perry that this might be something he could add to the menu. And so he did, and it was an immediate success. And it gradually expanded up and down the Connecticut coast and eventually up into the rest of New England. The Connecticut lobster roll, as we must call it, is truly a Connecticut invention. And I think it's our greatest contribution to sort of the road food culture. The aluminum king stick and carbon graphite moonshot are used for what purpose? Wiffle ball bats. They are $300 and $400 wiffle ball bats. Because some people take wiffle ball really seriously. Actually, our own kids took wiffle ball really seriously, but they didn't have $300 bats. But it's a wonderful invention. It took shape in the way you might assume. Father coming home from work one day saw his son and his son's friend playing pitch and bat with a plastic golf ball. And he said, why isn't there a plastic baseball-sized ball? Unlike most of us, he actually did something about it. And he got plastic and he worked on it, and he finally came up with this magical sphere that it's good for little kids to play with. It's a sturdy ball that takes a real pounding, and it's been made in the same factory in Shelton now as it was at the very beginning in the 1950s. In 1992, Harry Truman traveled from the White House to Groton to put his initials on something. What was it? If we think of Connecticut as an industrial state, as we should, this was its ultimate product, I think. The technical know-how, the concept, the technical know-how, I mean, there were elements from all around the country that came into play in coming up with the first nuclear-powered submarine. But the product was produced in Connecticut, and it was a total success. It was underway under nuclear fuel. The only reason it ever had to come up from underwater was for food, for the crew, and probably the sanity of the crew. It was a part of the U.S. fleet. It was a workhorse. It was part of the blockade of Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it was also a show horse. It was appeared in ports around the world as a symbol of America's naval strength and intentions. And I went down there. Has anyone been aboard? You can go board it now. Still, it's free. It's a wonderful thing to see, and it will forever seal the idea in you that you would never want to have been part of the crew of this. It's very cramped. They used to stay underwater for weeks and months at a time. And someone told me the last time I was there that at the outset of a voyage, they needed to have a lot of food aboard. And so they would actually fill the shower stalls with food. So things got a little gamey down there, I think. And I'm sure there are submarine stories that have never been told that would fill several books. What clothing item was pictured in the best-selling The Official Preppy Handbook and called the automatic choice with khakis? Yes, absolutely. A fellow named Sperry lived on shore. His father was a manufacturer of the Pond Lily Company in New Haven, but he didn't want that life. He was more of an outdoorsman. He liked fishing and hunting and sailing, but he was a tinkerer too. And one day he was walking his dog, a winter day in Connecticut, and he noticed that the dog was having an easier time of it than he was. So when he got home, he got out his magnifying glass and he crawled the dog over and he turned his paw over and he looked at it and he saw little cross hatches in the dog's paw. And he said that would make a great sole for a boat shoe. And so he worked on it. Came up with a design. He consulted with L.L. Bean, the person, not the company, and came up with basically this shoe. It was a success at first because the Navy contracted for it as one of their official types of footwear. And then in the 1960s, early 70s, there was sort of a collapse of America's dress code, and people were looking for a shoe that would fit in between a dress shoe and a sneaker, and that they could get away with wearing, and the topsider filled that bill really, really well. And it was made in Naugatuck at U.S. Rubber. So it was invented here and it was made here for many, many years. And I still remember going down with my mother to the U.S. Rubber shop in Naugatuck, and they had bins of seconds. And you could get Keds there, or you could get topsiders there. There were a few other types of shoes you could get there cheap. So that's where we went. The gargoyles on this building are she-wolves, meant to summon up the spirit of Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome. What is this building? This is dear to my heart because I'm from Waterbury. This is one of the magnificent buildings in the state. It came about in the first decade of the 20th century. The president of the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad went on a trip with his wife to Italy. And one of the places that they visited was Siena. And in Siena, there is a tower in the public plaza that they both really admired. So he came back, and at the next, I don't know if it was a board meeting or what kind of meeting it was, he said, what's the next major depot that we are scheduled to build? And they said, Waterbury. And at the time, Waterbury had 86 trains going in and out every day of the city. It was the second largest freight depot in New England after Boston. So they felt it deserved a worthy train station. So he said to the board, well, Bloomfield. And she was an entrepreneur, and she sold the product in print advertisements and on radio and on television. She really made the company what it became. And it's eventually sold to Campbell Soup. Where was General Dwight D. Eisenhower when he received word that he would be the Republican Party nominee for president? 1952. He was making the rounds of newspaper editorial boards looking for endorsements, and at that time the Hartford Times owned this tower. They bought it from the Hueblein family, or Highblind family, as some people refer to it. But it was while he was there that he got the phone call saying, you've got the votes, you will be the party nominee in 1952. So I'm going to stop there. This just gives you a taste of the things that are in the book. And I hope that you could agree that as these things mount up, as you read one after the other, and there were 40 or 50 more in the book, that each had, you may think you know it, but they have stories to them that are often pretty fascinating and almost always true. But I think you might find that you have a better sense of what Connecticut is and what the sorts of things that it produces and the people who've done it over the years, and that it will help in our eternal struggle for self-awareness and some sort of pride in who we are and what we do and what we've done. So, does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Fascinating icon that
you know, some of these stories I really do like. I like the Waterbury one. I put in some of my favorites into the slideshow. The Topsider one with the dog. Good dog. Did a good job. Going to the Thimble Islands is sort of a really unique place to go. But I mean, this building could have been an icon as well. I have the Capitol in there as an icon, but this building is actually, that's well better known. This is, I could do another book because I never got around to the Mark Twain house, which is I think I felt at the time that we wrote about it often enough in other places in the magazine that I didn't need to do it right away, and then I ended up not doing it at all. I do have some books here. They're $20 each. I'd be happy to sign them. They do make excellent gifts. If you know someone from out of state, especially, or who have gone and they like to be reminded of what they left behind, I'd be happy to do that. So, anyway, thank you very much for coming.